So we have wrapped up a very Huga Christmas, our Christmas series. We're going back to Nehemiah. But before we talk about Nehemiah, we're going to talk about adoption. Now, I'm sure you guys know that when I said a couple months ago that Jenny and I are adopting, I'm sure you knew that you were going to get 1,000 adoption stories. So let's just get this one out of the way. It's a pretty good one. So we've been through it all for the last couple of months. I think it's been about 6-7 months. We've had to fill out a lot of paperwork. We had to go out to Texas. We had to meet with a number of social workers. And I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, we had to do a home study. And I said we were approved for a home study. Now, some of you might have assumed at that moment that we were officially approved, meaning now that we could adopt. But that actually was not true. The home study was another step toward being able to adopt. So up to a couple of weeks ago, we were not officially approved for adoption. A week and a half ago, we got an email saying that we are officially approved to adopt a child. And my first thought is, I win. And what I mean by I win is they put us through it. It became a competition for me. Because I felt like we were running, it was running to the bulls, maybe not that, but I felt like we were challenged at every single step. If you haven't adopted, they want to know everything. You have to prove everything to them. The first thing they wanted to know was about our finances. How are we doing financially? So we had to fill out this paperwork where it showed how much we made and our retirement and how well we did with our finances. And so we put that in, we checked the box, we do all right. And they said, yes, you win, your finances all right. Then they asked about my physical well-being. They asked my doctor to send back several forms, and then they had me send a form back asking if I was physically fit. Yes, I am physically fit. Then they asked about my education, so I had to prove that I had a bachelor's and then eventually a master's. And then they asked about my spiritual life, and I'm a pastor, come on. I was pretty much born perfect and without sin, right? So we had to send all this stuff in to prove that we could adopt. And we did. And the end, I said, I win. I am victorious. Winner, winner, chicken dinner. That's Kevin.
Amen.
Amen. But I think we know where I'm going with this. Who's the winner? Who's victorious? Who is people like Jenny, not Jenny. Who is the winner? Who is victorious? Who made sure that we could get to this point? Not me, a little bit Jenny, but mostly God.
Amen.
So who deserves the victory? God. God deserves the victory. Finances. God deserves a victory for the finances. Who provided the jobs? Who provided the work? Who put Jenny and myself in a certain situation to meet the right people along the way to get particular jobs? We were applying just like everyone else for all the jobs that we ever got all along the way. Who then gave us wisdom regarding our finances, how to manage them? God did it. If I was left to my own devices financially, I was left to my own devices, I would own every Apple product and be on the street. Education. Who gave me a stepmom that said, we're going to homeschool you and you will study? And who taught and who was passionate about making sure her kids We're ready for the real world. And then when I was thinking about what I was going to do with the rest of my life, and I was like, I think I'll just go to the 2-year college and just, I don't know, try something else. She said, no, you're going to the 4-year university. Who gave me my stepmom? Who gave me my stepmom? God. Who gave me this Olympic physique?
Don't blame him for that.
That's all me. Who gave me my spiritual strength? Not me. God. There's these moments when you have this moment of victory, like, hey, I've won. You haven't won. I mean, a little bit. You had your part to play. But who should get all the attention at that moment? It's God. If a mechanic fixes a car, does the wrench get all the praise? The mechanic gets the praise. You're a tool. I'm a tool that God uses. But God gets the praise and the glory. And here's the truth. When we forget that, we are the most vulnerable. When we forget who got us here, that's when the enemy attacks. A disciple of Jesus knows from day one who was victorious. And if you can navigate the victories of your life and make sure that God gets the praise and gets the glory and gets the attention, you will be invulnerable to the attacks of the enemy. So we're going to examine Nehemiah chapter 6 today. We're going to talk about the wall. We've talked about the wall for a very long time. We're going to talk about it again. Nehemiah has been building this wall. He's going to be in this state, in this moment of victory. I love the way he navigates his victories because he always makes sure that he points to God and not himself. So Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 15. Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 15. It says, so the wall was finished. It's 5 words. So the wall was finished. Might be just 5 words to us, but for Nehemiah and for all that he sacrificed and for all the challenges and for all the opposition from the enemy, to say, so the wall was finished was everything. It's like saying, so the race was done, so you sent your last kid off to college, so whatever. That simple sentence says everything. It speaks to all the hard work that was put in. So for Nehemiah to say, so the wall was finished, we expected this moment, victory. And you should read it that way. Victory. He's won. They've won. But we go on to read, so the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month Elul in 52 days. And when all our enemies heard of it, all the nations around us were afraid and fell greatly in their own esteem. So all the nations, I mean, this is like Egypt, this is Babylon, this is Assyria, all these nations that surrounded and had known the stories of Israel for hundreds of years, hears that this nation that had fallen, and they were pretty happy about because they were a hot mess when they were around, they were in opposition. Now, Jerusalem's rebuilt, Israel's back. And the nations are like, uh-oh, we have a problem. They hear that the wall is finished, that they have victory, they're able to accomplish what they've been trying to accomplish, and they're scared. Now, I think it's important to recognize what they're scared of. For they perceive that this work had been accomplished by, it doesn't say by Nehemiah. They weren't scared of Nehemiah. They weren't worried about Nehemiah. They had no problem with Nehemiah. What does it say? The work had been accomplished with the help of our God. It was God they were scared of. It was God that was the problem here. It was God that was victorious and was able to overcome. Their entire attention, all the nation's entire attention was this God, not Nehemiah. And to reiterate the point, says that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. In the original Hebrew, the word help is actually not there. It doesn't even say help. It says accomplished with our God. So it doesn't say the help. I like the reason the original language doesn't say the help, because God's not just the help. He's not just a contractor you bring in to, work on the, work on the electrical. Put the help away. It is accomplished with our God, meaning if our God was not a part of this situation, it wouldn't have happened. The nations know it. They're freaking out. God is the one that made this happen. God is the one who deserves our praise and our glory. God is the one who does the heavy lifting. When it comes to this point in victory, when you've seen it through, when you've done the hard work, the best thing to do in navigating that moment of I have won is to say, God has won. He has done the heavy lifting. Hasn't he done the heavy lifting? In the areas that you have been able to overcome, hasn't he been the one who is actually victorious? Isn't he the one that saw it through? And that the person who did the heavy lifting, seen it through, should also be the same person that receives all the glory. Moms and dads, remember when the mother was pregnant? You're at the hospital, and she's going into labor. Who does the heavy lifting at that moment? Yeah, that's like Wayne's like me, of course.
He did actually lift me.
Heavy, wow. Who does the heavy lifting? I mean, she goes into the hospital room, she goes into labor, she goes through all the physical stuff that I've heard they go through. And it's an hour, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12 hours of labor. And then the baby comes. And it's this moment. And you look over her and there is no makeup. I mean, it's all gone. And she's sweating and her eyes are kind of in and out and she's exhausted. No dad at that moment says, no one is more tired than I am right now. You would see him fly right through the hospital window out into the parking lot. No dad ever goes to that child and says, wow, champ, hey, bud, way to go. I mean, your mom should just kind of lay there, but you. The mother did the heavy lifting. The mother deserves the glory and the praise. Ladies, can I get an amen? Amen. God does the heavy lifting. God does the work. God gets the glory. It's so hard though, because here's the thing. You put in the energy and you put in the time and you put in the sacrifice and you have taken the leaps of faith. I don't want to dismiss that. So it is so hard after all this time to then suddenly say, oh, thank you, God. It is easy at that point to say, thank you, me. Because you begin to recall all the stuff that you had to do to get where you are at today. So how do we make sure at this moment of victory that we give God the praise? Here's the trick. Give God the praise the entire way through. Amen. If you're giving God the praise from day 1, then day 30 or 90 or whenever victory comes, it will be easy. In fact, you see that with Nehemiah, and this is what I appreciated about him, and you might have caught it as we were studying this book. Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 8, and the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was upon me. So what does he say? It's God's strength that's upon me, and so that's why this king is giving me what I need. God gets the praise. Chapter 2, verse 20, the God of heaven will make us prosper and we, his servants, will arise and build. So the only way that we can arise and build and make sure that this wall is built is by God. He gets the praise. He gets the glory. And he goes on to point out regarding defeating their enemies. Chapter 4, verse 15, when our enemies heard that it was known to us and that God had frustrated their plan, we all returned to the wall. God frustrated their plan. They didn't frustrate the enemy's plan. It was God who frustrated their plan, which allowed them to go back and build the wall. Chapter 4, verse 20, in the place where you heard the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. Get your swords, get your shields, come on out. He's going to do the fighting. Chapter 6, verse 9, for they all wanted to frighten us, thinking their hands will drop from the work and it will not be done. But now, oh God, strengthen my hands. He recognizes that God is the strength. So what he does, it's so brilliant, is he makes a habit. He is disciplined to give God glory all along the way. So when the moment comes and they're in victory, he recognizes that the nations are not scared of Nehemiah, but of God, because God is the one who's doing the good work. And that's the habit we have to make all along the way. Give God glory every day, and it will be easy to give God glory in the time of victory. And so we continue in verse 17. It says, moreover, in those days, the nobles of Judah sent many letters to Tobiah, and Tobiah's letters came to them. So this is what's happening now. So there's all these nobles. There's all these as I would say power mongers or leaders in the area, and they're part of this power system. And Tobiah is in the middle. He's kind of the hub, and they're sending letters, and the letters pretty much read something like, "Oh my goodness, this is not good. We have a very delicate balance here of power so that we can get all the power and authority of the land. But now this Nehemiah just drops in, builds this wall, shifts the balance of power. What is going on, Tobiah?" It goes on to explain Tobiah's role. For many in Judah were bound by oath to him because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah. So the reason they're writing letters to Tobiah is because Tobiah is at the hub. Tobiah is kind of the mob boss. He is the one at the center of this power system in Judah. And so they're all writing letters. So what we see here, and I think it's really important to point out, is that even though the wall is built, and even though Nehemiah points out, hey, they're scared of us, what does he point out at this part? He points out that the enemy is still active. The enemy is still working. The enemy is still concerned. And so we continue on in verse 18. For many in Judah were bound by oath to him because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Arah, and his son Johanan, that is a hard word to read, had taken the daughter of Meshullam, the son of Berechiah, as his wife. Also they spoke of his good deeds in my presence and reported my words to him. And Tobiah sent letters to make me afraid. So to sum up here, they write letters to Tobiah and say, Tobiah, we're nervous. Tobiah's like, okay, I'll get on it. He writes another letter to Nehemiah and says, stop it. Stop what you're doing. What do we see here? The enemy is still active. The enemy is still working. Don't allow yourself to get vulnerable in this moment of victory, because you see what happens is we get lulled by the afterglow of our victory, don't we? Get this moment of victory. Things have worked out. Finally, we put in so much time and energy to win this thing. We've won, and we kind of get lulled in the afterglow of our victory. Our ego gets a little bit bigger. I know we have some students here who are in sports, and one of the things that you students know, that especially those who are heroes in your life, when you hear about bad reports in the news, when have those athletes made their biggest mistake? Is it usually when they're training, getting ready for their game, whether it's basketball or soccer or football? It's not during training. What is it? The night they've won and they have an after party. That's when they're making their mistakes, because their egos have gotten carried away from them. They've gotten lulled into the afterglow of their victory, and they've gotten taken away by everything. So we are not to get lulled by the afterglow of our victory. And we saw that. We see that with Noah. Noah did it, right? He saves all of humanity. He gets his family on a boat, and he gets some animals, and he saves everyone. When does Noah fall? Not before the ark. After the ark. When does Peter fall? The disciple of Jesus doesn't fall early on. He doesn't betray Jesus early on. It was after his sense of victory. We see it in Luke 22, They're all coming in. They're looking to Jesus. They're saying he's the son of David. He's the king. Peter's kind of like one of his disciples. He's one of Jesus's guys. And so he's kind of in this afterglow of victory. We see it in those last couple of chapters in the Gospels where Peter's ego is huge. And there in the upper room, Jesus says to all of his disciples, I have asked, or the enemy has asked to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed that God protects you. And Peter's like, I would never betray you. I would go to prison for you. And Jesus looks at him and says, by the crowing of the rooster, you will have betrayed me 3 times. When is Peter at his weakest? When he's in that afterglow of victory, when he's walked into Jerusalem with Jesus and he feels like the big stuff, the big man on campus. So how do we navigate that? Because you've won. God has brought you to this place where you're a part of a very victorious moment. How do you deal with that? I would encourage you to do this. Get into the habit of telling stories about how God overcame. Seriously, when you have this moment, when you stand in a place where you have overcome by God's power, get into the moment, because that's at that moment when we feel like we've won. What do we start to do? We start to tell stories in our head, like, oh, when I tell my friend or I tell my parents, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to explain how I played this part and I did that part. Don't do that. Don't start shaping stories in your head about how you were victorious. Start shaping stories in your head about how God's victorious. Some people, you've seen that. We probably have done that. Someone walks up to you and says, well, you saw how successful I was there. Would you like to know how I became so successful? Not really. Glad you asked. Let me explain. Right? We tend to do that. Don't tell those stories. Begin to tell stories about how God is victorious, because you got to hear yourself say it. But you know who else needs to hear you say it? The person listening. They don't need to hear how you're victorious. That's not going to be good for them. They need to hear how God is able to overcome. Because at that moment, in their pain and their despair, they're not going to say, oh, heavenly Kevin, right? I hope God's not named Kevin. I'd be really disappointed. They're not going to pray to Kevin. They're going to pray to God. And they need to know that God overcomes. So tell the stories about how God overcomes when it comes to the enemy. Don't tell the stories about how you overcome. In the last part, chapter 7, verse 1, it says, now when the wall had been built, and I had set up the doors, and the gatekeepers, the singers, and the Levites had been appointed, I gave my brother Hanani and Hanani, the governor of the castle, charge over Jerusalem. For he was a more faithful and God-fearing man than many. And I said to them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun is hot, and while they are still standing guard, let them shut and bar the doors, appoint guards from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem. So we started this passage saying, and the wall was built, and they're in this moment of victory. Where do we end? What are they doing at this moment? They are putting their defenses up. And this is absolutely important when you have this moment of victory. You see, when you have this moment of victory, that's when we tend to let our defenses down. That's when we tend to not worry. We feel invulnerable, like no one can touch us. But what Nehemiah knows to do at this moment is they have worked so hard. It's time to build the defenses and make sure that we're able to keep what God has done for us. And this is absolutely important. I will tell you, some of the worst ideas I've ever had is this moment where my ego is huge, everything is going great, and I say, wow, I should now go do this big thing. I'm going to go focus on doing this great thing. I want to take this whole thing to the next level. Instead of saying, you know what, I want to look at what I have right now, and I want to mark my defenses. I want to build the defenses around that and make sure that we're secure in what God has given us. What I love about John chapter 17, there it is. Jesus is at the end of his ministry and he's praying to his Father. And he says, hey, Father, I gathered up all these disciples for you. I did all this hard work, and I want to make sure that what I have done in my ministry, it lasts. So protect them. Protect them. In this moment of victory for Jesus, he doesn't go off to do something else. What does he do? He prays. Your child is graduated from high school, and you're so excited. Celebrate. Absolutely celebrate. Guys, let's celebrate. God would have us do that. But then the next day, grab your spouse and say, now let's pray. If God has provided for Cornerstone in a great way and done something amazing, let's celebrate. Absolutely celebrate. But you know what we should do the next week? We should have a prayer meeting. And what should the prayer meeting about? Now, God, defend what you've done for us. Prayer meeting is the best way to end any victory you've experienced. Celebration is awesome, do it, but it's prayer that will secure and hold the good work that God has done for you. Victory is sweet. I don't want to dismiss it. I don't want to throw it under the bus. I don't want to walk right past it. Victory is great if we handle it well, so let's do that. Let's handle it well. We've had so many heroes in our lives that we notice that they fall at their moment of victory. Let's not be like that. Let's not be like that. Let's turn to God and say, you've done it all. Protect what we have. Thank you, God, for overcoming.